like a music stand or?
I will get it.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Sorry for the delay. We had a little technology problem. We're going to have to go without the slides because the font on his machine is different than the font on my machine, and
I tried to install it on his machine, but I don't. It's on his machine, but where it goes when he downloads it,
Yes.
I don't know.
So, for those who haven't met, Pastor Nathan is a long-term friend of mine. He one day, I don't know what year it was, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, came to church, and he was in a Bible class like this, and I made reference to my great-grandfather starting a Pentecostal denomination called the Church of God, Cleveland. And he went to the school of that denomination. And, after that, we connected, and then his company that he was working for was kind of like going through transition. And I said, well, have you ever considered getting into ministry? Since he knew more Bible than any other person I've ever met in my life. And he was at the sweet spot. So he then became a pastor at our church, and now he is the pastor of the English language service at a Korean church, Hanalim? Hanalim. And that is the name, which means?
It has two meanings. It can mean echo of heaven or the resonance of heaven. It's God's voice coming to us, kind of a vertical thing. And then it can mean one united voice. So it kind of forms the cross. So it's a compound word now.
So he has the privilege of navigating multiple cultures now. And he is here because he's going to be baptizing Polo when this class is over.
You think that water's really cold.
It is freezing.
So cool.
Polo says he's up for it. But if you'd like to, after class, stay for a couple minutes and watch Polo's baptism. And the school is going to be coming to teach the kids about baptism too. So they will come over here.
Nathan's got a good joke about it.
I'll tell it after class.
Okay. So, Nathan, if you want to hold that, why don't you open us in prayer, and I'll get you your music stand later.
Okay. Father, thank you so much. You're good to us, Lord. You're faithful, Lord. Your hesed extends to us, Lord, and you've always been kind and faithful and gracious. So, Lord, I pray as we look at your word, you would teach us some things. I pray that you would help me to teach, but, Lord, that we wouldn't just be hearers of the word, but doers. Lord, let your spirit lead and guide in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. I've actually known Steve longer than that. His memory has shortened the event. There's a thing in biblical studies. We call it truncated time. It's when sometimes in the Bible they'll kind of shrink, compact time. That's what he did. We've known each other going on 13 years now, Steve. So it seems like. But I did come on staff around 2017. Maybe, was it? Yeah. Let's see. This is... Anyway, you know what? Steve, let's move this. Okay, yeah. This is... it's funny. We had a flat... Michelle drove me over here, and we had a flat tire on the way over here. So... Now, if I was really being spiritual, I'd think, is somebody trying to stop you all from learning? Or from me from teaching? Well, so if you read this chapter, that is chapter 8, it reads kind of like a dry military manual, right? Like a resume. I mean, David beats this nation, and then he beats that nation, and then another nation, and most readers kind of skim it. But it's actually one of the most carefully constructed chapters in 2 Samuel. It is the political peak of David's reign. And it kind of does the load bearing for the rest of the story. The rest of the story is going to lean on it. Now, I wish, because I did create a beautiful font for this, I even embedded the font into the slide that I emailed you, and it still isn't rendering. So God knows. Anyway, this chapter is kind of a fulfillment of Genesis chapter 15. You remember when God promised Abraham from the land of the river of Egypt from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates, Genesis 15:18. Well, it stayed the promise for almost 1,000 years. And 2 Samuel chapter 8 is where the territorial promise begins to land. David's campaigns pushes Israel's effective control to the Euphrates, if you look at verse 3, which I can't put on the screen for you, and toward Egypt's border. And the narrator is quietly telling you something. The Abrahamic boundary promised is being realized through David. Now, Solomon is going to inherit it, but David is the one who wins it. Now, I wasn't here to see all that Steve taught on this, but I'll tell you something that's different about the Samuel accounts versus the Kings accounts. If you read 1st and 2nd Kings, they clean David up a lot. Because, he's going to be a hero. But in 1st and 2nd Samuel, you get more of the nitty-gritty. Now, there were probably what we call editors or compilers for this. Now, that doesn't mean they weren't divinely inspired. Remember, there are still prophets in the land. And so when some of this material gets updated, you'll see some of them seem to cast David in a better light than others. Well, 1st and 2nd Samuel, you'll get the dirt. You'll see that he is not a perfect guy by any stretch of the imagination, even if he is a man after God's own heart. Anyway, the chapter is structured kind of like a compass, from the north to the south to the east to the west. Everything. David fights in every direction. And the Philistines to the west, Moab to the east, Zobah and Aram to the north, Edom to the south. And it's not just a chronological list. It's actually a geographical claim. Because you see, the narrator here, I'm going to call the writer the narrator, is showing you a king who has secured every border. You talk about secured borders. David was expanding. And this is, remember, the political peak of his reign. And it is 2 times repeated in verses 6 and 14, can't put up here, that the Lord, that is Yahweh, preserved David whithersoever he went. Now, so it brackets the campaigns like bookends. Who really does this? God. God preserves him. Because a lot of it, you hear me bragging on David. He's done all these things. But the truth is, it is Yahweh who has preserved him. And then after this chapter, you're going to notice something. The bracketing refrain disappears. Yahweh preserving David and all this, because things are about to change. So, you look at verse 1, this metheg amah. Everybody, do y'all have the scripture in front of you? Can I get someone, you typically read through it, right? Yes. Can I have someone who has a very strong command of pronunciation read this? Or
I think everyone's looking at you, Nathan.
All right, Nathan. You and I, the 2 Nathans, we show up. You'll read. You can read the next chapter. You'll read this one.
Okay. In the course of time, David defeated the Philistines and subdued them, and he took Metheg Ammah from the control of the Philistines. David also defeated the Moabites. He made them lie down on the ground and measured them off with a length of cord. Every 2 lengths of them were put to death, and the 3rd length was allowed to live. So the Moabites became subject to David and brought him tribute. Moreover, David defeated Hadadezer, son of Rehob, king of Zobah, when he went to restore his monument at the Euphrates River. David captured 1,000 of his chariots, 7,000 charioteers, and 20,000 foot soldiers. He hamstrung all but 100 of the chariot horses. When the Arameans of Damascus came to help Hadadezer, king of Zobah, David struck down 22,000 of them. He put garrisons in the Aramean kingdom of Damascus, and the Arameans became subject to him and brought tribute. The Lord gave David victory wherever he went. David took the gold shields that belonged to the officers of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. From Tebah and Berothai, towns that belonged to Hadadezer, King David took a great quantity of bronze. When Tol, king of Hamath, heard that David had defeated the entire army of Hadadezer, he sent his son Joram to King David to greet him and congratulate him on his victory in battle over Hadadezer, who had been at war with Tol. Joram brought with him articles of silver, gold, and of bronze. King David dedicated these articles to the Lord, as he had done with the silver and gold from all the nations he had subdued, Edom and Moab, the Ammonites and the Philistines, and Amalek. He also dedicated the plunder taken from Hadadezer, son of Rehob, king of Zobah. And David became famous after he returned from striking down 18,000 Edomites in the Valley of Salt. He put garrisons throughout Edom, and all the Edomites became subject to David. The Lord gave David victory wherever he went. David reigned over all Israel, doing what was just and right for all his people. Joab, son of Zeruiah, was over the army. Jehoshaphat, son of Eliud, was recorder. Zadok, son of Ahitub, and Ahimelech, son of Abiathar, were priests. Zeruiah was secretary. Benaniah, son of Jehoiada, was over the Kerethites and Pelethites, and David's sons were priests.
All right.
Wow.
Good job, Nathan. You were brave. I'll give you that. Now, you got to remember, there's a northern kingdom and there was a southern kingdom, right? Yeah, and there were all these territories. David unites all of it. Or at least he lays the way, and his son Solomon's going to do a bit more. But you're seeing him at the pinnacle of his power right now, and the Lord is with him in preserving him. Now, if you look at verse 1, and we're going to hit the ground running here, Metheg-Ammah is kind of hiding a regime change. This name is kind of a funny one, but the phrase likely means the bridle of the mother city. I grew up on a farm. If you want to control a horse, something powerful, you put a bridle in it. Well, what this is suggesting is David just didn't have like some skirmishes here. He's actually taking the seat of power from the Philistines. This city actually, if you look in 1 Chronicles chapter 18, this is the city of Gath. He's not just winning border skirmishes. He's seizing control of the Philistine power. This is a big deal. It's kind of, this name just hides a kind of collapse of the enemy. And then if you look at verse 2, there's this bizarre and brutal thing that takes place. Notice how David deals with the Moabites. He has them lay down on the ground, and they take out almost, you could imagine, a tape measure. And 2/3 of them, the cord, the length, they get killed, and 1/3 of them he allows to live. Now, what's strange is this: that David's own great-grandmother Ruth was a Moabite. And now he's killing 2/3 of them. Even if you look at 1 Samuel chapter 22, you guys covered 1 Samuel, I think. Remember, David actually sends his parents to Moab for protection. But something, this is during when David was the outlaw, Saul was chasing him. Well, something happened in the interim. Maybe it was Moabite betrayal, something, but the text doesn't say that, and the text doesn't justify it. It just says he kills 2/3 of them in a very bizarre display of power. And again, it's ironic because Ruth was a Moabite. That's great-grandma. So then you see in verse 4 that David hamstrings chariot horses. Now you might say, why would he do something like that? Well, do you remember what Jewish people, or we'll say Israelites, were supposed to do when it came to things like chariots and horses? What were they supposed to do?
Deuteronomy 17, not gather too many to yourself, because you'll be depending on the horse.
That's right, rather than the Lord. So he's actually deliberately crippling the horses and keeping only enough for 100 chariots. Now that's him being faithful to the Deuteronomy. Steve knows it very well. His pastors know these things sometimes. Some of them don't so much, but he's good. Now, this sounds kind of gratuitous, but remember, Deuteronomy 17:16. It forbids kings from multiplying horses. So he's actually obeying the Torah even at military cost, because you might think, why not keep these horses?
I wonder, in just 2 chapters before, David is seeking to bring the Ark of the Covenant in, and he brings it in by the Philistine model. Put it on a cart and bring it in. But then they have to go to the book and see how are we supposed to do this. And then they did it the right way. I wonder if when he dusted off the book of the law, that he then was refreshed on that horse thing, because
he probably
certainly
was.
Wasn't aware before that incident, but the death of Uzzah might have been a real shock to everyone.
Yeah.
That we need to do it God's way.
Oh, this is real theological discipline here. I mean, it's religious discipline, because most kings, if they conquered, they would take those horses and the chariots and use them in war. David maims them. I mean, he just, and it's funny, he has this kind of theological obedience, but later on in 1 Kings 10:26, we'll learn that Solomon abandons that. And it goes none too well. So I think that's an important one to look at. Now, we read through a bunch of things, and for the sake of time, I want us to kind of, let me see if there's anything I want to hit here. It says in verse 7, David took gold shields that belonged to the officers. And then it also mentions a great quantity of bronze. See verse 8? Well, do you know that bronze later on will become the temple? It's going to be used in the temple. So David plunders this massive quantity of bronze from Hadadezer's cities, and the chronicler tells us what happened to it. Well, this is the bronze Solomon would later on use to cast the bronze sea, the two pillars, the vessels of the first temple, all that stuff. So the instruments of war become instruments of worship. Isn't that interesting? It's like the swords into plowshares logic going on here, where they'll beat their swords into plowshares. And this is 8 centuries before Isaiah ever writes that line. So you're already seeing it tipped off. In fact, this chapter is setting up a lot of contrasts. You're going to see contrasts with Solomon later, but even in chapter 10, and I won't steal Steve's thunder, but there's going to be even a contrast between David and himself. So there's a lot going on here. And, most of this is kind of boilerplate. I'm on the fly because we're under the gun here, flipping through. If there's anything here between up to verse 13, let me know. Let me just mention with verse 13. Edom's defeat fulfills an ancient prophecy. This is verse 13, 14. Now, it says, 18,000 Edomites were killed in the Valley of Salt, with garrisons placed throughout Edom. Now, if you have, and I think it's probably over here, the Masoretic text reads the Aramaeans, but it's almost certainly wrong. And it's because we know in 1 Chronicles 18:12 that it's Edomites. And the superscription of Psalm 60, if you look there, well, in the geography of the Valley of Salt itself all point to Edom, because you know where the Dead Sea is? There's a lot of salt there. I actually floated in that one year. It's like a soup. The salinity is so salt. Yeah, it is good for the skin, right? So they say. But now, it's not that you couldn't drown in there. If you got flipped over on your belly and were face down and panicked, I guess you could. But you won't sink to the bottom. And so this is an interesting thing. So it's almost, so what's interesting is that in Hebrew, the letters for Aram and Edom differ by just one stroke. One is a resh and the other is a dalet. And they are so, maybe, I don't know if this will show up. I don't use Hebrew much anymore, but I still remember one or two things, or maybe this is the...
Here's this one here.
That one? How about this?
That works.
Okay. So a resh looks like this. That's where we get the letter R. A dalet looks like this. You know how you can tell the difference? If it just extends out a little bit. That's the difference. Now you could imagine a scribe who was reading this would come at the difference between Aram and Edom is you're reading these two letters, and if you grow up with it, you notice those little things. But it's probably what we call a scribal error. And so almost certainly this is Edom. If I were a betting man, And since I'm near Vegas, I might as well be one. I think I'd hit the jackpot here with this one. Because again, we have a superscription in Psalm 60 and the Valley of Salt itself. They all point to Edom. And so it's just one stroke difference, but this is what we call a scribal letter swap. And this is one of the cleanest examples in the Hebrew Bible. So if you're a Hebrew nerd, there you go. But now notice something here. The subjugation echoes back to Genesis. Remember, Esau, Edom, was prophesied to serve Jacob, Israel. Well, that's Genesis chapter 25. Now, centuries later, this prophecy lands in 2 Samuel chapter 8. There's a lot of fulfillment going on here. So when you read it and it seems like a dry military resume, there's actually more going on than what you think. And the fulfillment is real, but it's not final. Genesis 27, verse 40 says that it also predicted Edom would eventually break the yoke. And the bitterness shows up later in the book of Obadiah and Psalm 137. I know I'm moving a little fast here, but you can blame me for starting late. Let's take a look at verse 15. I want you to see something. It says, David reigned over all Israel, doing what was just and right for his people. Now, that's a powerful statement. He executes justice and righteousness. And that sets the bar. I mean, we're bragging on David here. Now, but as I mentioned, sandwiched between these things of Yahweh preserving David. So right between the conquest summary and the cabinet list, the narrator drops this single line. It's Mishpat ut Tzedekah, if you're into Hebrew. And this is kind of prophetic shorthand for the ideal kingship. Like, this is what a king should be like. It's the standard the prophets will later use to indict every king who fails, and trust me, there are a lot of them. Wouldn't you like it if our leaders always executed justice and righteousness? That's the ideal. And Isaiah 9:7 will pick up the same phrase to describe the Messiah, the Messianic king, I should say. And to Samuel, so 2 Samuel 8:15 is the verse that establishes the bar, and David, at the moment, he clears it. But it won't be long before he trips over it. Okay? So this is, you get a real strong sense. This is David at his peak. Things are going well. What a great king. In fact, here's a very strange thing, and there's a lot of ink spilled over this one. If you look at verse 17, Zadok, son of Ahitub, and Ahimelech, son of Abiathar, were priests. Sariah was secretary. You're getting kind of a cabinet laid out here, right? Benaiah is the son of Jehoiada, and it says it was over the Kerethites and the Pelethites. And this is the weird thing where all the ink gets spilled. And David's sons were priests. Now, it's a lexical puzzle. The line in Hebrew literally says David's sons were Kohanim. Now, that's just the plural. Kohen, you know anybody whose last name is Kohen? In New York, we have a lot of Jewish people. Kohen means priest. Kohanim means priests. And it calls them priests. But David's family was from Judah, not Levi. So the sons couldn't be priests in the Levitical sense, right? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. But here's the thing about this Hebrew word. Talking a lot of Hebrew, and if I had been a little more prepared, I just showed you some more letters. But it is, it's got a wider semantic range than its later technical meaning. And it possibly covers things like royal officers, ministerial functionaries with religious function. It has a broader range. So what's happening is, you know how a president has cabinet members? What's happening here is you're getting a kind of a list of the cabinet members in some way. And in fact, if you go to 1 Chronicles 18:17, we won't go there, it kind of smooths this out by calling them chief officials at the king's side. So you kind of get tipped off. And even in 2 Samuel 20, where we're not going to go there, Ira and Jairite are called Kohen to David, despite they have no Levitical credentials. So it's a small lexical question with big implications. about how kingship and priesthood related in early Israel. So, but here's the weird thing. Cherethites and Pelethites. Now, they're foreign warriors. Now, I have a niece named Cherith, but she's named after a brook. Anybody know what brook that is? And it's spelled a little differently. Somebody was there, a prophet.
Elijah.
The brook Cherith. Anyway, my sister named my niece Cherith. Now, the Cherethites are not really related, but I always think of her. Cherethites were almost certainly Cretans. And later on, Cretans, they're not, the name is etymologically related to Crete. I've been to the island of Crete, actually. And the Bible doesn't always cast Cretans in a good light. In fact, we use it. I don't know if you've ever heard something, that you're a Cretan. Yeah. It usually, so the Cherethites were almost certainly Cretans, and the Pelethites were probably Philistines, though some scholars treat them, the name as a wordplay or an elite designation. Either way, David's personal bodyguard was made up of foreign origin warriors. I mean, can you imagine? He brought in the warriors, likely men who came with him from his Ziklag years. Remember? Did you cover that, 2 Samuel? Or you'll later on you'll do it in chapter 15. So the king of Israel was guarded by ethnic non-Israelites. How about that? His bodyguards were. So the political optics of that are kind of wild, and the narrative says it without flinching. What you get in these historical books, it's not that you never get commentary or theology, you will, but what you get a lot of times is this is how it is. And here's one of the reasons we can trust the Bible, although 1st and 2nd Kings cleans things up a little bit more than 1st and 2nd Samuel, is that it puts the dirt out there. It doesn't sanitize it. In most texts, they try to present people only in the good light. But to kind of put yourself in the negative light, well, that's something. So there are a couple of things that I want you to notice. We'll just kind of sum this up. We move from war to worship. Wealth flows from war to worship. David doesn't keep the silver and gold. He dedicates it to Yahweh. That's verses 11, 12. And it becomes part of the treasury and the seed money. I don't think they use that term, but that sounds like something off the TV, doesn't it? Seed money for Solomon's temple. Now, the temple isn't built from David's wealth. In fact, why can't David build the temple?
Because he's a man of blood.
Yeah. What a good guy he is. He's at his peak here. But let me tell you things are complicated. Just because you have great exploits doesn't mean there isn't a price when you do things. I mean, two out of 3 people put to death, just line them up, That's something. So the temple isn't built from David's wealth, but it is built from the consecrated spoils of the nations. And this is something we've got to be reminded. Faithful is not the same as flawless, right? David hamstrings the horses in deliberate Torah obedience. He executes judgment, but he executes Moabites by measuring lines. I mean, he dedicates spoils, but keeps foreign bodyguards. This is something. Chapter 8 isn't presenting a perfect king, but it is presenting a faithful one. Right? And there's a difference. And the next 3 chapters, which I don't get the pleasure of doing chapter 10, will show you just exactly how much this matters. So the real subject isn't David. The Lord preserved David wherever he went, and that's mentioned twice. And when you get to chapter 11, you're going to see where David stops trusting and starts taking. And that contrast, I want you to keep these things in mind. I don't want to steal thunder, but there are some serious contrasts being put out here. We're front-loading a few things. You have to see, you're seeing the white, so to speak, the white page, but the black is about to come. And there's going to be a serious contrast. So chapter 8 is the height. But if chapter 8 is the height, chapter 9 is the heart, chapter 11 is going to be the fall. And let's take a look at chapter 9. Can I get someone to read this one? How do you feel about reading chapter 9?
I'll read it.
Okay.
Okay. These are easy words. David asked, Is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? Now there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba. They summoned him to appear before David, and the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" "At your service," he replied. The king asked, "Is there no one still alive from the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness?" Ziba answered the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan. He is lame in both feet." "Where is he?" the king asked. Ziba answered, "Is he at the house of Machir, son of Amiel of Lodabar?" So King David had him brought from Lodabar, from the house of Machir, son of Amiel. When Mephibosheth, thanks.
Mephibosheth is one of the hardest names to say in the Bible.
Mephibosheth. Say it one more time.
Mephibosheth.
Mephibosheth. There you go. Son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David. He bowed down to pay him honor. David said, "Mephibosheth," however you say it. "At your service," he replied. "Don't be afraid," David said to him, "for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table." Mephibosheth bowed down and said, "What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me?" Then the king summoned Ziba, Saul's steward, and said to him, "I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and bring in the crops, so that your master's grandson may be provided for. And Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, "Your servant will do whatever my lord the king commands his servant to do." So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah, and all the members of Ziba's household were servants of Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table. He was lame in both feet.
All right, yeah, good job. Now, Mephibosheth is hard to say. Do you know there used to be a test in the Bible to figure out if you were from a particular tribe?
Yeah.
And you had to be able to say something and pronounce it without the wrong accent. Shibboleth. Yeah, because some groups couldn't say it. Actually, there are many countries that can't say, for example, the TH sound, like thought. Germans have a very hard time with it. Many groups do. So if you don't grow up hearing it, it's very difficult.
I can say it if I don't look at it.
Mephibosheth?
Mephibosheth.
Yeah.
Did I say it?
You're very close. I don't know if you make it across with the shibboleth. You know, if you didn't pronounce it correctly, that was the end. But
I'm also tongue-tied.
But this is a church of grace. This is
Okay,
Grace
so.
Community.
Mephibosheth.
No,
Okay.
Mephibosheth is hard to say. So these two chapters are they sit quietly, or the next chapter, including the next chapter, between David's rise and his fall. And there's all these cultural things going on here, linguistic, theological details it's easy to look over. But what looks like kindness, and it is followed by a war story, and it actually is tightly constructed pairing of what happens when chesed, there's a good Hebrew word you should know, with a little guttural, like you're clearing your throat. Chesed, there's a difference between chesed received and chesed rejected. And you're going to see that. Steve will deal with the rejected part. I'm going to show you what happens when it's received, but keep it in mind because there's a contrast coming. So chesed is the framing in theological terms. Now, what does it mean? It's actually mentioned 3 times here, verses 1, 3, and 7. Chesed means something like covenant loyalty. In fact, it's very hard to describe precisely in English because it sometimes gets translated loving kindness, faithful love, fidelity, something like that, covenant loyalty. And David asks about these things, and he wants to know whether he can show covenant loyalty, hesed, to Saul's house for Jonathan's sake. And this sounds strange because, first of all, Saul wasn't exactly his friend, David's friend, right? And this isn't mere sentimentality, although I'm sure he had fond feelings for Jonathan. It's David honoring a covenant that he and Jonathan made back in 1 Samuel chapter 20. Remember where Jonathan specifically asked David to show hesed to his descendants forever. So chapter 9 is David keeping a vow made nearly 2 decades earlier. He's acting theologically, not just emotionally, is what I want you to get. And also, David's subverting a Near Eastern playbook. See, here's the thing. When a new dynasty took over, you know what the standard procedure was? Oh, yeah. You're looking for them. Like, where are the relatives of the former leader, right? Because if there were surviving family members of the deposed king, they're trying to prevent future rebellions. And that's exactly, Solomon will later do exactly this to Adoniah's faction, right? In 1 Kings chapter 2. But David's opening question is there yet any that is left in the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? That would have struck ancient ears as politically reckless. Why would you do something like that? He's actively hunting for the rival heir, not to kill him, but to bless him. Crazy, right? And so he
Could be, when Obama was running for president in 2008, his highest competitor was Hillary.
Mm-hmm.
And then he wins, but he makes her Secretary of State, which the old saying is keep your friends closer.
And your enemies closer. Actually, he was taking that particular thing. Obama had read some things about Lincoln, who, after the Civil War, created a cabinet with opposing people. And so it has pros and cons, right? So there's this guy Ziba. He's like, I'm at your service. And he happens to know where Jonathan is. Now, this Ziba guy is an interesting character. He's a little too rich. I mean, he's got 15 sons and 20 servants of his own, right? That in verse 10. That's not a household servant. That's a manager of an estate. He's been running Saul's family land in the absence of an heir for almost, I don't know, certainly for a long time, and he's certainly profiting from it. So actually, David restoring this to Mephibosheth later is kind of threatening him. And later on, you're going to hear him badmouth Mephibosheth. But the text plants kind of a quiet bomb here. Ziba becomes a controversial figure, right? Because in chapter 16, 19, he's going to slander Mephibosheth during Absalom's revolt. So I think chapter 9 is just kind of laying the foundations for this through what we call political ambiguity. Verse 4, this is important. Lodabar, it says, where is he? The king asks. He says he's in Lodabar. Now, have we heard Lodabar before? Anybody hear Lodabar before?
I think I heard it once. I think it means like the lowest of the low, something like that.
Well, that maybe could mean something like that.
Pasture.
It can mean no. It can literally mean no pasture, or no thing.
Okay.
Low can mean no, and debar is a thing or a word, but it can mean no pasture or no thing. It's nothing. And so the town where Mephibosheth is hiding translates roughly as a place of nothingness. And that's fitting for a forgotten cripple from a deposed dynasty. Right? Hebrew narrative loves this kind of geographical wordplay. He moves from Lodabar, nothingness, to the king's table of abundance. There are all these contrasts, so pay attention. This is geography mirroring grace. Geography mirroring grace. He goes from nothing. You ever heard somebody say, I came from nothing. God has brought me a long way. So he's in a town called Lodabar. It's fitting. And Mephibosheth's name is actually theological irony. And it may be a scribal substitution. His actual name was Meri Baal, is contender of Baal, or Baal contends. Later scribes will substitute Bosheth, which means shame, for Baal, and they're just trying to get away from this kind of Canaanite deity's name. So he's got this kind of name substitution. They don't want to associate him with Baal. So the text we have reflects the scribal discomfort. It's a substitute. That's why you're having such a hard time with Mephibosheth. It wasn't even his real name. But it does carry the meaning of shame. And think about it. He's coming from a deposed family. He's crippled. He's in Lodabar. He's in a place of nothingness. His name connotes this whole mess. And David elevates someone whose name itself has become a synonym for disgrace to a position of honor in many ways. Maybe not merely honor. And notice what Mephibosheth says. He expects death, not mercy. He describes himself as a dead dog. You've heard of I'm a dead duck? Sometimes they say dead dog. And it isn't false humility. He actually expected that. Would have been the normal thing. David's doing something very strange here. So it has, he would have been probably ritually unclean. He would have been socially excluded because he's just completely worthless in many ways. But it's also the name phrase David used before Saul in 1 Samuel 24:14. David once the hunted at Saul's mercy is now the king extended mercy to Saul's nobody. So Saul, who was hunting David was really a kind of a nobody in a way, now is flipped. Saul's son, instead of being hunted to kill him, is actually being hunted down by grace and by mercy. He's extending mercy. So David says, don't be afraid, for I'll surely show you chesed. For the sake of whom? Your father Jonathan. And he's going to restore all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, which means that Ziba's got some work to do. He's been handling it all this time, the steward, as it were. I want to move along a little bit just because, let me see how much time I have. I've got 10 minutes. Ziba, of course, is playing it smart in verse 11. He says, I'll do whatever the Lord my king commands his servant to do. And Mephibosheth ate at David's table as one of the king's own. He's there. But now I want you to understand something. Doesn't it seem nice that he gets to eat at the king's table? But do you think that's all there is to that? Actually, it was a political category, not just generosity. In the ancient Near East, the court protocol was eating at a royal table meant simultaneous honor and surveillance. Surveillance. It was a permanent political pension. It was kind of a restoration of dignity, but it was also a way to keep the last Saulite, we'll call him, that's the descendants of Saul, under constant watch.
That's still under the realm of keep your friends close and your enemies close.
That's exactly it.
Okay.
That's right. So the phrase actually appears 4 times in the chapter, verses 7, 10, 11, and 13, eating at the king's table. And the narrator here wants us to feel the weight of that. It's royal adoption language, and it's also quiet containment at the same time. I'm going to treat him well. But think about that. You get pulled to the table. You get to eat all the time. But you see, in a way, is it a palace or a prison? Now, really, Mephibosheth couldn't get. In those times, it wasn't like people had crutches or they would build you braces or things like that. You were at the mercy of he was coming from a place of nothingness, and he gets moved to the palace. And for him is to be put under watch. Now, and something I want you to notice about David, because this will be key later when he's confronted by Nathan, is that David, he fell a mighty long way. When the prophet Nathan confronts him, how does he make him realize that? because a king could put you to death like that. And the way he did it is he doesn't confront him directly. He tells a third-person story, right? Because this makes you think. When, like, if someone, maybe you like someone and someone says that's a bad decision, you push back. But how objective you are when it's a third party, right? You'll say, oh, you shouldn't date this person because of this reason. When it's you think you're going to hit the lottery, right? That I'll be that one exception. But if you're talking to your friend, you say, the writing's on the wall. Don't date so-and-so. Now, I'm using that as an example just to say simply this. Sometimes the way we reach people is to tell a story third person so they don't think it's directly them. Second person is direct address, and that's confrontational. And the reason why I bring this up is because what Nathan does is he moves him, and I want you to remember these P words. David's in the palace, but to get him to realize, how far he has descended, really, not really ascended, he moves him back to the pasture when he was a shepherd. So he says, he tells a story about a little sheep. Mary had a little lamb, but it isn't Mary; it's another person's lamb, and that moves David from the palace to the pasture. Because remember, think how far he's come. He's coming from the pasture, hiding in caves and acting crazy and all kinds of things, that he moves into a palace. But here's the thing about moving into a palace. We saw the last chapter, he's at the zenith of his power, but we're about to, and the Lord was with him. But what happens is you've heard this saying, we've been saying a lot of adages today. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. You have to guard against it. And the reason I say that is, he's got this guy under surveillance. And I want you to notice here's maybe also something that I think is important, because I've been encountering this. My sister's not doing very well. I have a sister battling brain cancer. Grace doesn't fix everything. Sometimes it just repositions. It says, verse 13, it says, and he was lame on both his feet. He's eating at the king's table, but his body is still broken. The Bible isn't pretending grace erases all damage. It's saying his position has been transformed, even though his condition. Now, when I say ultimate grace will, when Jesus returns and sets everything right, but this is a far more honest theology than many sermons. And I want you to also see something too. There's a kingship foreshadowing here. David functions as a covenant keeper, but also a table host. Think about this. And the restorer of the undeserving. Now, all of these categories point forward to whom? Who?
God the Father.
Well, God the Father, yes. But think about someone who is a covenant keeper and a table host.
Jesus.
That's right,
Oh,
right.
Jesus.
And he's a restorer of the undeserving. This is a Christological kind of claim. The lame man eating bread at the king's table forever is not a small image. Right? Now, we use the communion to kind of symbolize some of these things. Check my time here. All right, I've got 4 minutes. Questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, observations?
Kind of reminds me of like one of the parables. I think it was Luke 14, where Jesus says, like, if you are a host and you're inviting people, don't invite your most rich buddies, but just invite the poor and the lame and the needy just with you, so that you don't expect anything in return from them. And in the same way, if you see someone just sitting way back over there, the host can just tell them hey, friend, come sit up here. It's just it's such an honor, just to sit just in the king's, the host's presence.
Yeah. Well, and David in many ways prefigures Jesus, right? In so many ways. Now, just a few things to keep in mind here. David is at the pinnacle of his power in chapter 8. There's this little interlude about him showing chesed to Jonathan's son, right? His grandson. Son, Mephibosheth.
Grandson of Saul.
Grandson of Saul. But it's interesting, but there's also some surveillance going on here. David wasn't a perfect king. He was a faithful one, but you're about to see his imperfections unfold, right? They're definitely going to unfold. And so keep those kinds of things in your mind. What happens in the palace? How far he's come from the pasture. Even, we talk about prisons even. There are a lot of P words. Right now you're seeing him clothed in white, executing righteousness. But soon you're going to see him executing friends, not just 2/3 of his enemies. So those are things to keep in mind. And what about, grace?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's such a picture of grace here.
Yeah.
It's, we're the broken, like,
Mephibosheth.
yeah, there you go. Thanks for saying it. We're the broken like he is. And it's sort of a picture of the grace of Jesus, that is a whole story of grace.
Yeah.
And that's what I see it.
And this is a powerful theological point, because it's hard when you think of God the Father, like, we talk about God's transcendence. It seems very hard to relate to God. He's perfect, right? And you see with David a man filled with foibles. I mean, he on one hand, you can model your life after him, and then you can model what not to do. Then Jesus comes along, who God takes on human flesh, so we have a high priest that can be touched and be related to, but he's without sin. David is, he's struggling to be an example, but Jesus just is the example. And we have a God who can relate to us, and we can relate to him precisely because this God became a God-man. The Son of God became Son of Man so that the sons of men can become sons of God. That's what happens. And David is prefiguring this. But it's nice to be able to relate to somebody. Don't go out and kill 2/3 of your enemies. And don't put, you'll see worse things later. But God used him. And he wrote some psalms. And he did great things. But this is a God of grace. Any other thoughts, comments, things? I apologize again. I really did embed the fonts. But I was running behind. I had 54 minutes of sleep, and I felt like I was behind I was on the other side of the 8 ball.
Well, the primary reason you're here is about to come, baptized in Boulder.
That's right. And this is also a picture of grace, right? So we're going to see that, and hopefully you're all there supporting it. No thoughts, comments? I'm going to pray. Father, I thank you so much for an opportunity to imperfectly, just like your servant David, only here I am sharing imperfectly, try to convey how gracious and faithful you are, because God, you are the reason Chesed exists at all. Your covenant loyalty, your faithful love, your kindness, Lord, it extends generation after generation, not because we deserve it, but because you're faithful. So, Lord, I pray that we learn from this things that we should do, but also things that we should not do. God, help us to see in an imperfect servant David how we need you all the more. To cleanse us, to keep us, to protect us, to be the one who sustains and preserves us. I ask all this, we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
It's always a good thing we're supposed to keep ourselves in control.